Always very dangerous giving the moderator role to someone who's in love with the sound of his own voice. Moral of the story is never give an Irishman a microphone because you won't get it back until the batteries run out. So, we have a fantastic panel today and a great topic. And what I like about this panel is that it's very mixed in that lots of different people from different walks of life. We have Josh from X7, who's the Esports international team now, like of international renown on the island.
Yeah.
We have Jade from Amber Gaming, giving us a more sensible view of how to make money out of esports and like a view from there. We have Kenny from PokerStars, who's hopefully going to give us his views on like where e-gaming views the market to a certain extent. And because he hasn't been on stage enough today, we have Lyle as well, just to make up the rest of it. So I suppose just to kick this off, this is an enormous topic. We're going to try and keep the put some boundaries around it. So it's about how you guys see how you can make money out of, like, from your particular angles, and also any advice that you can give to others that are out there as this, rather than trying to solve the problems of the esports market, because there are many and varied and would be here for far too long. So I suppose from your position, and I'm going to start with Josh here. Tell us a little bit about your experience in the market, how you got into it, and also what sort of opportunities are you looking at from an Ireland perspective and outside?
Right. Hello, everybody. So I started my career in esports a long time ago, probably about 8 or 9 years ago, as a player, not as the owner of an organization. So I've kind of seen it from all perspectives. I know what the players expect and what they need to develop in their careers. And now, coming full circle after being involved in different industries, I thought to give back to the players, I'll create my own organization, give back to them exactly what I would have wanted as a 15 or a 16-year-old going through an academy system. And so X7, we compete in 2 different separate titles. In terms of the monetization, for this panel, there's a lot of different aspects around how an organization would want to profit from that. One being prize winnings, that's an obvious one. But prize winnings are quite, it's an unreliable revenue stream. Your team isn't always going to be the best. It isn't always going to win X amount of prize money at every tournament you go to. But it accounts for a small percentage of your revenue streams. Another one as well being player transfers. So you can relate this to traditional sports. You look at footballers, when they transfer teams, there tends to be quite a big payout, upwards of 100 million in some cases. Esports players, they're not yet at that level, but there are some players that have transferred for teams for upwards of 2 or 3 million euros. And that will continue to go up as the industry develops as well. And as I'm sure we'll get into it as this talk goes on, there's a lot more angles where we look to profit as an organization.
Excellent. And Jade, you don't necessarily come from this particular background, but you're seeing ways into it which traditional businesses are able to add value.
Yeah, so we almost fell into esports in some ways from a e-gaming perspective, where we had a client who is effectively combining both of those things, the esports and e-gaming, which I think is more of a standard model these days. I think, from our point of view, there is so much that corporate service providers or those who are involved in professional services can do to monetize esports. And I think it's about realizing that it's not something you should be afraid of. You don't need to be an expert in everything esports to be able to offer professional service. And a recipe for whether that's startup businesses, professional players who are really no different to professional sports people. And so I think it's about applying thought and all the expertise we have to that sector to be able to offer them the expertise to professionalize themselves. Consider things like the large, prize monies that are available and up for grabs. We have escrow services, for example, that can really benefit tournament organisers, players, just education, I think, is really important. And like I said, not being afraid and also not pretending to know everything. Because, to draw another parallel to e-gaming, I don't think anybody can say they're an expert in absolutely every sort of game, every single sort of product. And so sometimes I question when you attend conferences like ESI, why people in our space feel as though they need to be an expert in everything esports. I don't think that's absolutely necessary. Sure, you should educate yourself and understand the sector, but you don't need to know every single nuance of it to add value and benefit and apply that expertise.
I'd just like to sort of pick up on that and put that to yourself and to Lyle, who are not necessarily from this background. What is it like doing business with people in an esports world? How have you found it? Abuse, Lyle, towards me can be done in the bar, not now, okay? But give a flavour for those who aren't used to this.
Well, I think I have found an instant level of untrust because I'm old compared to them. I tend to use overly complicated business terms that perhaps turns them off. I often get the sense that they're being very protective of their industry, trying to keep people like me out. And that's absolutely fine. I think where the conversation starts to create value is when they understand that you can bring some value to them, that you understand some things around how to conduct the business, perhaps isn't there first and foremost. They have a passion for a particular game. They have a passion to reach the top of whichever tournament or league or whatever that they are in. But they don't necessarily always have the battle scars and gone through the challenges that some of us have been through. Especially, and I think Jade picked up on this, especially those of us who have been through the e-gaming challenges over the last 20 years. I think we can recognize there's some very similar challenges in esports as there were in e-gaming. The answers are absolutely not the same, but we've been on the journey before. We know how to go on that journey, and we know how to work with the sector to help them get to where they need to be, to legitimize and to further monetize what they're looking to do. And from our perspective as a government, obviously, we want the island, everyone in this room, to be able to make more money and grow their business, focusing on a new industry.
Fantastic. It's like we actually planned this out, where you've talked about e-gaming, and I'm going to move on to Kenny next. So I'm quite excited about this. Where do you see the opportunities around, especially from PokerStars and what it's trying to do, and how it views the sector?
For me, understanding the opportunities is about providing a service or value to the industry. And I'll just give two quick examples. So whenever I talk to people about esports, you might hear a stat such as where more people watch esports than watch the Super Bowl. And people go, oh, wow, that's amazing. That's fantastic. But what they don't understand is the Super Bowl's one event, 100 million people watch it, and it's over 2 hours. The League of Legends World Finals is an event that lasts for 4 weeks. So it might have more people, but it's over a course of a month. And basically, it's only actually 4 million people that watch it at the same time. So you need to understand who the customer is and how to add value to them. So when I do chat to a lot of esports teams or esports enthusiasts, they don't really fully understand the market, and you need to really get to grips with it. Just in terms of monetization, I'll give another insight to the esports industry. So, for example, obviously PokerStars, we deal with gambling, and gambling is a dodgy word, basically, when it comes to gaming, basically. But there is an industry out there where esports gamers compete against each other, and they compete with something called skins, basically. So they would gamble a virtual item, and I've got an example. Sorry to go off. So this teddy, I won playing Mario Kart against a friend, basically. Yeah, this is what we gambled for. But essentially, this teddy has no value, but it has a resaleable value. So that's what happens in esports. You can compete with something called a skin, and it has a resaleable value. Now, that value was $7.4 billion in 2016. But then the industry kind of said, actually, we don't like this term gambling with skins, so they closed down the market. And that value didn't go to traditional cash gambling. And that's because the esports consumer doesn't want to gamble with cash. They want to gamble with items that have a resaleable value. So to monetize it, you have to understand who the consumer is and what they're comfortable with gambling, basically, and what they're comfortable with doing. And that's not cash gambling. That's gambling with items, digital assets. So it's about, if I was to look to make money of this, how do I service that need? How do I service the need to sort of give a digital item and let people wager with that?
This is the sort of thing that could go on for a while, I think, because it moves into...
Sorry for the teddy.
No, I enjoyed it immensely, you know, it was very cute. My thoughts are with this, that we could talk about NFTs and blockchain and also, especially because cryptocurrencies are so often used to gamble or trade via some of these platforms as well. Just stepping off that direction just for a bit, because I can see us getting lost in the weeds to a certain extent. Going back to Jade, where are the areas that you're focusing on, and where do you think that you can make money in your particular business? Excuse me.
Good question. I think, it's no secret, it's our traditional business lines. So it's with the incorporation and management of companies. It is speaking to shareholders, tournament organisers about how we can help to professionalise their offering. It is speaking to players and looking at how we can protect them, looking at tax affairs, for example. So when you are looking at tournaments happening globally all over the world, how do you account for that? How do you deal with the taxation issues that crop up? So it really is our core business lines that we have then adapted to service the esports space. And I think the point is, ultimately, it's about knowing how to talk to that consumer, the tournament organizer, the player, etc., in the right way, so they aren't, as Lars said, necessarily intimidated by you or think, who are you, really professional people that just know about gambling. But I think it's understanding the psychology of those individuals, adapting the product or service to really suit their needs and their requirements, and helping them to resolve their issues. And sometimes they may not even know about them. Going to ESR was interesting because I think I realised, as Lars said, a lot of the people there are facing similar challenges that the gaming community did 20 years ago. And so to see really enthusiastic individuals looking for investment, looking for funding, trying to navigate the complex world of, well, how do I formalise things, how do I professionalise my offering, that is really where we can come in and offer that service. And going back to my point before, it's why I think you don't need to necessarily be an expert in everything esports. We've supported, Josh in some ways as a business, and that's been an interesting journey. And we've learned so much from just working with Josh, working alongside digital, about how the Isle of Man can better proposition itself and its esports offering as well to the wider world. And we continue to learn from that process. And I think you have to listen. You have to adapt your products and services. You look at the IP that's established in these games, the complexities that come up with those. You look at the age of people that are watching these competitions on Twitch, and some of the complexities that arise around advertising rules and regulations. So actually, the esports world is, whilst very different in lots of ways, actually very akin to many sectors and industries that we know. And I think it's about adapting that knowledge and expertise.
Fantastic. You've also tossed up a question which is going to be towards Josh now, quite quickly. You're an org owner. You must be able to see from an org owner's perspective the type of services that the island provides or would be attractive to those who would come to the island in some way, shape or form. Can you give us a view on them?
Yeah, of course. I think the island's already got a good reputation for having solid CSPs, Amber included. And so it's more like the corporate structure behind it. When we first started X7, it was very much sort of a bedroom operation, as most things are. They start as an idea and then they grow and grow. And eventually you have to take things a lot more seriously. You have to think about tax, national insurance, contracts, visas in some case. And so having an island that's so well equipped already to cater for those sorts of services, I think an organisation like us really benefits from having that locally and not having to outsource those things to the UK or further afield. For myself as an organisation, we're still young. X7 is still less than a year old, although next year we're due to be in front of a potential audience of over 10 million people with players from around the world, and that means visa applications. That's something that we would lean on CSPs to help us with. The contract law, making sure that those are watertight. Some of those have buyout clauses in their contracts, as I spoke about earlier about player transfers. If you want to make sure you're guaranteeing X amount for your player if they go from your team to somewhere else, you need to make sure that's all properly structured. And I don't have a background in law, so it's important that I rely on those who know what they're talking about to make sure that it doesn't sting us later down the line. So yeah, having CSPs around us like this locally is a great help for an organisation.
Fantastic. So going across towards more of an open question to the panelists. So, what support do you need in general around this particular topic? And where do you think the government can step in to help in places? Also, where do you think the sort of boundaries are as well? I will pick on people if you don't volunteer. So
Okay, I'll volunteer one. I think, again, it's about raising awareness. So from an esports perspective, what's been fantastic is actually we've said, well, the Isle of Man is open for esports business. And I think lots of jurisdictions can say that, but having people, like X7 as an example is fantastic because we're not just talking about it, we are actually doing it, and that's an example. I think we need to be doing more of that. There's always room for improvement to do more, particularly, in the more international marketplace now that we can, travel and see and meet people. And I think it's about propositioning that correctly. I spoke earlier today about different government departments collaborating more, perhaps in a digitized way. So when we're looking at things like relocating players from different parts of the world, etc., that experience for the people who are coming here is really positive because it's a small, close-knit industry. We want people to be telling their friends about how fantastic the Isle of Man is, and from an Isle of Man PLC perspective, what a fantastic journey they've had, because I think that's how we attract more of the same, so it becomes a bit of a domino effect.
Yeah, I was just going to add, I think there needs to be an educational element to esports. So, for example, when I deal with some marketing agencies and I say, can we do something with esports? They'll go, oh, great, we'll do Facebook adverts. But they don't even use Facebook, the esports players. They'll use Twitch, they'll use YouTube channels, streaming channels. So there needs to be an educational element for how to speak to esports customers. But the real opportunity I feel is actually for new companies because you're coming into it fresh. And I feel like for some organizations, it's so difficult to move, you're not agile. But if a new organization comes along and go, hey, how do I actually research and understand these esports players and these consumers? They can quickly adapt to offer them services that actually will meet their needs, basically. So that's, for me, is the big opportunity, and just the educational element, and then providing services for new companies to set up to sort of offer those services.
So I think if we kind of consider what the government can provide, and also perhaps how the business community can work with the government to grow this. We've already set out our framework of the fact that we need to raise awareness of the Isle of Man as a esports sort of jurisdiction. We need to demonstrate that we have the grassroots that's available, because that is important to the industry to know that that's something we're providing. I'm going to give a shout out to Chris Kissack again, who has done a fantastic job at kind of starting that journey over the last 12 months. But we need to keep doing that. You've talked about education, and absolutely, that's why we've got the likes of Josh joining the team. We've got David, and we'll have another person with a strong esports background who can really go around the island and talk about what it's like to live and breathe esports, what it's like to go to tournaments, what it is like to run an organization. And of course, we need to kind of create a pull to bring this industry to the island, and that's why we want to look at some form of either regulation, code of conduct, whatever it may be, but a strong pull to the Isle of Man. What we need from businesses, and we're already getting this from a number of people who are in the room as well, is to work with us and to start looking to expand their businesses to include esports, start considering how perhaps some of their products need to be tweaked for a slightly different audience, but be brave enough to be able to see that there's an opportunity in an adjacent market and go and start focusing some time and resources at that. And I think with those ingredients, we stand a really, good chance of creating a new sector here that's going to be beneficial to everybody. And that's not just going to be CSPs, that is going to be marketing firms. It's going to touch so many different businesses, both digital and non-digital, on the Isle of Man.
Excellent. I think that there's, we're going to have one sort of more open question to the panel, then it's going to be questions that come up and anyone in the audience. So I suppose this one's about watch outs. So what are the myths and legends of the industry, and actually what is the reality, and like how would you step around the things that are likely to bite you?
I think going back to an education piece, and without going too much in depth, because I'll talk about this later in a separate talk, it's the culture element. I think there's a stigma almost on esports and video games, and it's the same thing, and the culture is the same throughout. When it's not, you look at the Premier League, and that's the professional league of football. The NBA is the professional league of basketball. Esports is just the professional leagues of video games. And so the difference is, you need to know the differentiation between the two. And that wider community is made up of a large number of people. You've got hardcore gamers, the ones that are there till 4 a.m. in the morning, trying to be at the top of a leaderboard, that might not necessarily be at professional level, so that's as far as they can go. You've got the casual players that are just there for an hour or two to play a game with their friends. You've got the tournament organisers, you've got the professional teams, the professional players, the actual tournaments themselves. So I think a myth is that it's just one culture, one collective outlook across the industry, and it's not. And it is quite important for any business wanting to get into the space that you really immerse yourself with a particular niche, whether it's a professional player, and finding out exactly what he uses on a day-to-day basis, because that won't be the same to your standard, gamer late at night up till 4 a.m. drinking Red Bull. There are different needs for different elements of the industry, so that's probably the thing people need to be aware of.
Or any other branded isotonic drink,
I think from our point of view, it's about stereotypes. So the sorts of people that would be interested in esports, whether that's players. There was a stat given this morning around it's not just teenage boys in the bedrooms, but I think also about who would watch esports. And I think you'd probably be surprised at the the demographic of people that watch competitions. So I hadn't watched competitions until earlier this year, and I had to get my husband to show me how to use Twitch. I had no idea. And I honestly thought, watching your team play, that I would probably watch, 5 minutes of it and just not be interested. And the reality is, whilst I don't watch esports every weekend, I really enjoyed the match. I watched the whole thing. I learnt loads. I think it was really interesting. And I would say to anybody, if you are involved in the space, you need to invest the time to understand it and to watch matches and to watch tournaments and so on. But I was fascinated by everything that was happening. And I think for me, it was the takeaway of how strategic the games actually are. And it's something that I've been able to share. Somebody this morning spoke about Love Tech. There are so many young girls that we work with through our charity Love Tech who are involved in STEM, who are avid esports fans, and these are young girls.
Yeah, my myth buster is just basically, as I said before, we have companies, people assume that everyone who's involved in esports is rolling in money, but the truth is right now they're not. And that's not because it's not a market where you can make lots of money, it's just they're not monetizing it the right way. And that's because they don't understand the customer, and they don't understand what the needs of the customer is. So a lot of companies just apply their existing business models and force it almost onto the esports consumer or the esports player, but they're just not interested in that. It was like I was saying before, people aren't interested when I go to esports events and say, hey, do you want to gamble money on this? Like, no, we don't want to gamble money, but we'll happily gamble an online skin. Like, we don't want to take part in Facebook, but we'll happily be part of a Discord channel. So you have to reestablish your business model and make it appropriate for esports consumers. So there is money to be made there, but just, in my opinion, not many people are doing it the right way right now.
I mean, I think that there are so many myths around this. And it's not just esports, it's any new sector. We've seen this across a range of different things. But you'll always get people who say, people in esports don't like Facebook, they want Discord. These are the ways to communicate, and they're going to be young people. They're going to not have a clue about business. If you take all of that at face value, you'll be completely misguided. I've met people who are in their 60s who are looking at getting into esports. I've met young people who absolutely know what they're doing and where they're going with esports. I've met people who probably can't use Discord but are still interested in esports. I think the challenge we have is, with it being an immature industry, there are really no standards at the moment. There's a whole plethora of different people, and when you go into a meeting with these people, you do need to kind of judge each one as they come and not go in with too many preconceptions, or else that can burn the relationship. And I think consistently across, again, it's esports as well as everything else, relationship is key. You need to make sure you build that, you create a common dialogue that you can both understand and a level of trust that you can both move forward with.
Fantastic. I'm going to take a couple of questions that come up on screen. The first question I'm going to pick up on is, aside from the availability of professional services, how else can the island position itself to attract esports orgs/companies to relocate? So whilst the panelists have a think about the answers to this or decide not to, I think that there's a few things here which are really important about this island. One, having that community where everything's in one place is really quite important. Also, the infrastructure here is very important as well. Like, it has the capabilities to deal with complex trading and complex data transfers, and the ability to be able to speak to people that day is something which is not necessarily, like, having personally experienced this by having to raise money for a esports company that wanted to raise in London. It took HMRC, it still is taking HMRC 6 months to get back on something which could probably be done in a day here. So this is actually a very important point. Professional services we've dwelt on, but there are so many things here that we, I suppose, take for granted, which is not necessarily available in the outside world. Does anyone else want to add to that, or?
I'll chip in a bit on this. I think, so what I will say straight away, and I do repeat this an awful lot, as the Isle of Man, we are not going to be a destination for large tournaments for esports, and I think it's worth getting that out there. It's just not what we're geared up to do. But we are geared up to do an awful lot, and actually the reason we started this journey is we tasked David to do a piece of work around what assets do we have that would support the esports industry on the Isle of Man? And the response was quite overwhelmingly positive. We have a lot of attributes. But we do need to recognise we're at a point in the industry and a point on the Isle of Man where we don't know everything that this industry needs. There's going to be things that pop up that take us completely by surprise, and that's what I was talking about earlier around, I think we can see a very clear route to professional services offering an awful lot of support to businesses. But aside from that, there will be other benefits that I think it's okay for us to say we don't know what they are yet. And I'm sure there's owners out there, there's tournament owners, there's publishers that also may not have actually zeroed in on what the island is going to do for them as a business. Those are the conversations that we need to have with them. And between creating the relationship between the Isle of Man and the global esports industry, we're going to identify even more opportunities of why the island is got a role to play in their business.
Well, thank you very much. That's all we have time for. There's a question about e-gaming sector having a negative impact. Feel free to talk to myself or any of the panelists about that. And Jack, having the conversation, the question for Josh. I'm sure Josh will be delighted to answer that one later. First of all, thank you very much for the panelists. Thank you all very much for listening. That's that.